Hello and welcome to the Mad Madam Mel podcast. My name is Mel and I am a yarn dyer living on the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. This is back to my regular kind of podcasting episodes now that all the excitement of yarn festivals is all done. I have one finished object, I have two works in progress, one nearly finished and one that is kind of cast on, a new project but is barely started. I also have some knitting plans and I'm kind of going to talk about those first because we have a little bit of an exciting announcement on the podcast this week, in that I am going to be joining, or I've been asked to collaborate on a knit crochet craft along through October. It is the Halloween Sockalong that's been hosted and now co-hosted by me, but hosted by Kirsty of Grinnig Creations, and I will pop their links to their channel and social medias and such down below. But basically what it is a sock-along, a make-along through the 1st of October to the 31st. And the idea being is to cast on a pair of Halloween socks on the 1st of October, whether that be knitting or crochet, and they're like adult size socks, not like baby socks or something like that. And to kind of share things along the way and you know, share projects and stuff like any other sort of craft along or knit along or what have you. It, as far as I'm aware, it'll be mostly hosted on Instagram with the hashtag Halloween Sockalong, hashtag Halloween Sockalong. But I know not everybody has Instagram, so because this year both me and Kirsty will be sorting out prizes for people that join in. If Instagram is a problem, just drop me a message and I will I do have a Facebook page as well, and just, like, you know, share your Halloween socks as you are progressing through. There's no kind of imperative to finish on the 31st of October, like cast off a full pair of socks in a month. I know I'm hoping to, definitely, because my sock yarn is going to look amazing, but there's no kind of you don't have to have cast off by the 31st of October. I will obviously be sharing on the YouTube channel through October whilst we are doing Vlogtober. I'm not sure if I'm Vlogtobing every single day, but I'll try as many days as possible. So there will be episodes where I'm showing my Halloween socks, my Halloween Sockalong socks, but I will also be sharing them on Instagram as well. So the yarn that I am going to be using for my Halloween cast on will be this gorgeous Halloween yarn that I got whilst I was in Perth Festival of Yarn, and it is this yarn by Marcus of Fiberpunk in these gorgeous Halloween colours. This is a self-striping merino nylon sock yarn in the colourway Alpha Bars Knickers, and I just loved it. I fell in love with this on his Instagram page before Perth and knew I was going to have to get some whilst I was there. I know I've said on the podcast that I'm not the biggest fan of knitting merino socks because I go through them quite quickly, but I am definitely had to make an exception for this colourway. And I'm hoping to kind of get 2 pairs of socks out of this, so I plan to do contrast toes and heels and probably cuffs as well, because if I do that I can use 50 grams of this year and hopefully make a second pair of Halloween socks next year. So for the contrast, what I'm thinking about doing is dyeing up some yarn with some of my own dyes, and I'm going to use some of this base which I bought a bit back, which is the Regia undyed sock yarn. I really like the Regia for socks, they're commercial yarns. So when I saw that you could actually get the undyed yarn, I thought that's perfect because I can dye, well, I can skein off 25 grams of this for a pair of socks and dye it whatever colour that I need for contrast toes and heels. And for example, there's another pair of socks. I want to knit some Christmas socks, but struggling to get the perfect shade of Christmas red to go alongside some Christmas striping yarn that I have, and I need that kind of dark red that's not kind of like a brownish red. It wants to be more of a true pure dark Christmas red, and I'm really struggling to get that colour in a sock yarn that isn't, you know, like a merino. So because I'm a yarn dyer, I plan to do my own contrast toes and heels hand dyed yarn for that, and instead of just using my merino or my BFL, which is kind of the stock yarn that I would normally choose if I want them to really last really well, like 2 years before I have to darn them, then I'm going to go with the Regia. So yeah, that is my plan, and I will probably dye this in a semi-solid black to go with the semi-solid black in the self-striping yarn. But I'm not sure if I'm just wanting to do plain black or semi-solid black contrast, because what I'm very tempted with is, last year I made a pair of Halloween socks called the Hubble Bubble Double Trouble socks, which are these ones with little jack-o'-lanterns on the heels, you know, like with colourwork jack-o'-lanterns. And I mean, I don't like purling colour work, but it's such a small chart that it wasn't such a big deal. I think that the chart is only, let's have a look, it's only about 20 rows, something like that. So I'm tempted to do that again, and where last year I did the colours from the original design, which was the black and orange, it would be to do semi-solid black, and then if I can find it, for the contrast is to use this of my hand dyed yarns, which is on my cottage base, I think, which is a merino bamboo, which I wouldn't normally use for socks, but using it as colour work, because you're using 2 yarns in the same row, there'll be tough yarn, very not tough yarn together in the same row, and because they're on the back of the heel, I think it'll last quite well. My socks tend to wear out on the bottom of the heel and then on the ball of the feet, because I'm at home a lot. I don't wear shoes very often, so they don't tend to rub on the back of a pair of shoes. So whereas this on the bottom of the sock, I will have to do slip stitches on the ball of the foot. I won't need to worry about the heel because I will be just doing plain black on the bottom of the heel, and colour work would just be on the back. So those are my options, and that is my plan for, I think I'll only get 1 pair of socks done in the knit along, but I could be wrong, or the craft along rather. But that is my Halloween cast on Saturday, I believe is the 1st of October. And yeah, so you know, if you feel free to join me and Kirsty in the craft along and check us out both on Instagram. I'll put Kirsty's details down in the description box on YouTube below, and you can check out their podcast too. They've just put out another episode yesterday or the day before, with more information about the Sockalong on there too. So fortunately, my finished object for this episode is actually a pair of socks, and that means that my needles are now free for the cast on Saturday. I have been slowly nibbling away at these socks for a few weeks now, possibly even longer. I don't do a lot of sock knitting normally because it's usually my travel knitting. But most of my cast-ons in the near future are going to be garments, so having a pair of socks that I can kind of work on an evening when I suddenly reach a point in a garment where I need to like kind of pause because I need to be able to read the pattern in more detail the next day, really quite helps to have something simple to be able to work on, which is kind of when I've finished off these. So these are actually a cotton blend sock, which I wouldn't normally knit with. They have been done Turkish cast on, toe up. They have a gusset and a slip stitch on the heel. See, this is why I always get mixed up. Which bit is the heel flap and which bit is the heel turn? I think the bottom bit is the heel turn. So I have slip stitched the bottom part, and then I have just knit stockinette up the back of the sock, because like I was saying, I don't tend to wear out my socks at the back. I tend to wear them out here. Then I have gone a reasonable height up the ankle. I've started knitting my socks a little bit longer than I used to. I used to kind of start the cuff about here, and then I do my standard kind of 25 rows of rib at the top, and I have done a 2x2 rib and a stretchy bind off as well. The yarn that I've used is actually a Regia yarn. It is the, let me just pop that down a moment. It is the Regia cotton colour in the colourway Tutti Frutti 2. And I hadn't realised this was a cotton yarn when I ordered it. I just loved the colourway and assumed a sock yarn was, you know, made of the usual sock materials. But this is actually a 72% cotton, 18% polyamide, 10% polyester. And that's another reason I probably wouldn't have chosen it, because I'm not the biggest fan. Well, I don't like polyester unless I can't avoid it in, say, like in a bra, for example, where you have fabrics and a lot of it is like man-made fabrics. Because polyester kind of makes your skin sweat, or I find it does, or it kind of like holds scents as well. So to me, it doesn't make any sense to have polyester in a sock. It's going to make your feet sweat more, but it's also going to, if you do sweat more, like hold those fragrances, which you don't really want. Whereas nylon generally doesn't. It tends to be a maybe if you wore like the old-fashioned nylon pajamas or nighties from when I was little, they would make you sweat or make you absolutely freezing cold, or click on your skin like they used to, the nylon sheets as a child. Oh, child of the 80s, nylon sheets. So the nylon in the sock yarn doesn't really bother me, but polyester, we shall see. I do have a fair amount left, probably not enough to knit an entire sock, but enough to knit probably with some very large contrast toes and cuffs and heels. So I don't think there's a huge amount more to say about the socks. I mean, they're a plain vanilla sock, and that's one of the things I'm tempted, apart from doing the contrast toes and heels on my Halloween socks, is to keep the socks fairly plain. My other option is there is a pattern called the Anastasia socks even, and I think that's got like a, it's got like a, I think it's like a combination of an eyelet and slip stitch, kind of like a spiral effect around the sock, and it works its way up the sock, which I might do as well, because it'll show up on a self-striping sock, okay, and won't kind of warp the stripes. Whereas doing something like a cable with a self-striping sock won't really show the cable off to its true, in its full glory, or same with lace, because there is a couple of sock patterns I would like to do through the autumn, a little Hocus Pocus socks, for example, or there's another one called Autumn Fires, but I don't think they'll really work with a Halloween self-striping sock. Well, they might, but I think I don't think I'll be able to see the lace and the cabling so well with a multiple coloured sock. They're better off with kind of a plain or a like a semi-solid. So yes, I think I will be keeping my Halloween ones relatively plain, unless I have this kind of spiral line in it, and yeah, just doing the collarwork heels if I decide to. So onto my main work in progress, and this is what I've been ploughing in most of my knitting time with, and it is my Arboreal sweater by Jennifer Steingass, and it is flying along. I have both sleeves done, and I have adjusted the pattern slightly for the sleeves. They're both completed, just the ends to weave in. The body is most of the way there. I'm thinking maybe another inch of stockinette before I start the rib, and then I can adjust the length of the rib depending on how long I want the sweater. But what's kind of held me up is the neckline. The only thing I changed with the sleeves is I have made the sleeves longer and the cuffs shorter and looser than the original pattern, so they kind of come down like this sweater that I'm wearing. It'll come down, cover to my knuckles. This is actually the Red Moon sweater, or Orange Moon in my case, sweater that I'm wearing. I will link that down below. But the neckline on this I wasn't happy with. In fact, when I first knit this sweater, what I decided to do, because I don't like, well, I say I don't like high necklines, and then this one's relatively high, but on the design it looked quite snug. So my plan was, when I did this pattern, which I will show you the original design picture, just a moment. Yeah, on the original design, you can see the neckline is relatively high. But I have an issue with round yoke sweaters being very bulky on the shoulders. This one is a prime example. It's really quite bulky here, more so than it needs to be. It could do with being a little bit more, you know, like a lot of this bulk taken out. So my plan was to knit a smaller size at the yoke and then increase where you separate for the sleeves, because it's a top-down sweater. Increase for the sleeve and just increase the stitches to make a bigger bust size, rather than starting with the bigger bust size and it being too broad on the shoulders. But in knitting a smaller size, I was concerned that the neckline was going to be too tight. So I cast on the amount of stitches for what would be my bust size in the pattern instead, and then the idea was to just do less increases before I started the colourwork section. But once I did, how far did I do on this? I hadn't gone very far. I think I had done maybe halfway down the first leaf on the yoke, and decided that the neckline was huge, like huge, and there was nothing I was going to be able to do to fix it. So I ripped out the whole lot and started again, and I cast on the amount of stitches for the size of yoke that I was actually knitting, which was fine, and I carried on and knitted and knit rest of the sweater. But when I came to try it on, I found the neckline was still too big, even though I'd cast on the amount of stitches for the size that it called for. Now the pattern calls for a gauge of 20 stitches to 28 rows per 4 inch on a DK weight, which is fair enough. And I got 19.5 stitches and 28 rounds per 4 inch, which is really close as you're going to get. And that was knit on my gauge was knit on a 3.75 needle, which is as the pattern stated as well, which was really great. It's just my gauge was ever so slightly off, but not close enough to really make a big difference. The other needle, the smaller needle size for things like the rib, she has put down as 3.5mm, which is only a 1/4 millimeter difference, which isn't much when it comes to a rib. So I had done the neckline obviously in the 3.5mm, but when I came to do the rib on the cuffs, it just wasn't going to be tight enough to make a decent rib. It was going to be sloppy basically. So I went down to a 3mm size for the rib for the cuffs, and that's what I'll do for the rib for the bottom of the sweater as well. But the neckline was so large that I'd regretted not casting on with a 3mm needle to begin with, or even doing something else with. I just couldn't. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. So what I did was, last night I picked up the stitches just above the colourwork chart, and I ripped out the cast on, which, if you've ever ripped out a cast on rather than a cast off, is a pain in the butt. But I did it. And then what I've done is I've gone down to a 3mm needle for the neckline, and I've also added short row shaping at the back, because I do like a bit of short row shaping at the back for my kind of little humped area at the top of my shoulders. So I have added on about an inch at its deepest at the back of the neckline, and then I've started to reknit the collar bottom up. Now this collar doesn't have a ribbed collar, it has a garter collar, which if I can get it to focus, it has a garter ridge collar, which I actually do really like, but I suspect that is the reason why the 3.5mm needle on like garter ridges was just too sloppy, too loose, to be able to kind of pull it in that little bit or stay in position. Basically it was just stretching out too much. I do really like the look of the garter ridge neckline, which you can't see brilliantly on the pattern because it is such a dark yarn, like a dark navy, almost a navy blue, that she has used for the original design. But my mum's actually going to make one very similar colours to that, which would be great because those are more her colours, blue, rather than mine. So yeah, that's where I'm at. A couple more rows on this neckline, and I will just cast off with a stretchy bind off. I haven't decided whether I'm going to stretch off in pearl or in knit, rather than, like, if I was doing a rib cuff I would obviously stretch off in pattern, so it'd be like a stretchy bind off in knit to pearl too, that sort of thing. With this I can cast off in knit or pearl. If I cast off in pearl, it'll help the collar kind of stay in position because it'll want to roll inwards, but if I cast off in knit it'll roll outwards, which is not a bad thing either. So I haven't quite decided. It will probably be bind off in pearl, but we shall see. But regardless, I will do a stretchy bind off because I bind off really, really tightly. Otherwise I always bind off with a stretchy bind off, unless it's something like a oh, what's it called, like that shawl I did at Stephen West's, the tubular bind off, is that right? Tubular bind off, something like that. Anyway, I always do a stretchy bind off. The yarns that I've used are this one, well, they're both the same base. They are tangled on my knitting cable. We have the Drops Soft Tweed, and this one, the orange, is in the colourway Carrot Cake, and the beige is in the colourway Cookie Dough, which these look amazing together. The Carrot Cake one, I'm actually going to be knitting a second sweater. As soon as this one's off the needles, I'll be casting on another one, exactly the same base, same colour, and it is a, it's called, what is it called? I can't remember, but it has a very simple lace design, over the very simplified lace design of a jack-o'-lantern face on the front. The carved sweater, carved pullover, I think it's called, in exactly the same base, but I have to do a gauge swatch for that, because this, a 20 stitch gauge is fine on this DK weight. I might end up just using the same needle size. 19.5 stitches is pretty good for a DK weight, and it means it's not too dense. I don't like too dense a fabric. I don't like too, you know, open a fabric unless it's like a shawl, but I don't like too dense a fabric for a cardigan or a sweater. So we shall see. It might end up being exactly the same needles, exactly the same yarn, but a completely different sweater. So yes, hopefully in the next few days this will be finished, and that means I will be able to cast on a Halloween pullover for October, as well as the Halloween socks. So that brings us to my final knitting project for this episode. I don't have anything other than knitting this episode. In fact, I haven't really done anything other than knitting for a while now, which is a shame. I have a mostly finished, very large cross stitch I really need to get cracking with. It's like a black background fabric with like a beautiful fox on the front of it, but I just not enough time to do everything. This one actually does have a little bit of crochet, but only because I've made it so, and that is, I have started working on my Humblebee shawl by Fibre Tales. It is a triangular shawl. It is knit bottom up, and it has these little bees, line of bees, and a little line of lacy flowers. It has a picot edge with some garter at the bottom, and mostly garter with this lovely ridge down the spine. And this one is supposed to be knit in a DK weight yarn, but I am knitting this in a fingering weight yarn because I really wanted to use some of the yarn that I got from Perth in 2019, and it is this yarn, which is a gorgeous kind of a nutty brown with golden undertones. It is stunning, and this is a merino cashmere nylon blend that I fell in love with at Perth. I had a stall that year, and the stall was just kind of just across the way from where I was, and I kept seeing this sample knit in this colour, and I just like kept being drawn to it. So the yarn I've used, let's hope the label is in here. The label is not in here because the label is inside the skeins of yarn, the cakes of yarn, so bear with me. The yarn is from the Wool Barn. There we go, the Wool Barn, and it is their cashmere sock, 80% superwash extra fine merino, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon, in the colourway Toffee. And I have 2 skeins of this, which should be plenty. Now, I could have held them double to make a DK weight. I'm not entirely sure why I didn't do that actually, but I decided to do a fingering weight and make things harder for myself instead. So what I did was, because I'm using a fingering weight, I've had to increase the stitch count to make up the shawl to be as big, because if I used the same amount of stitches I would end up with a very small triangle shawl that I couldn't do anything with other than maybe use it as a neckerchief. So I've increased the stitch count. I basically took the chart for the bees, which I think is a 10 stitch repeat, and just added 20, a multiple of 20 onto the ends. So instead of casting on whatever figure it was, I cast on the new figure, which was so many extra 20 repeats onto the end, because it is a bottom up shawl, which means that means a lot of casting on. But to make things harder for myself is I want to use up the entirety of these 2 skeins. So what I've done is get myself tangled again, is I have done a crochet, see there's the crochet, a crochet provisional cast on, and I have left this halfway through a row, which doesn't surprise me at all. I'm quite tangled and I haven't knit hardly anything. I've knit hardly anything. I've knit about 4 rows of garter, hardly anything, and I have the orange yarn is my crochet cast on, and I used the video that Andrea Mowry put up of how to do a crochet cast on for how I did it. I have tried doing crochet cast-ons before and they failed miserably, but I think it's because I was doing it wrong. So hopefully this will work out okay. So that's why I've done that. So instead of starting with a picot cast on and then doing the garter section at the bottom, I am basically starting past the picot cast on, doing the garter section. I'll knit the whole shawl, and then whatever yarn I have left over, I will rip out the crochet provisional and I will re-pick up the stitches and keep on knitting until I'm nearly run out of yarn, and then I will do a picot bind off, or I'll leave it plain. I'll see how I feel. I'll probably do a picot bind off. It's harder to estimate the amount of yarn you need for a picot bind off than it is a regular bind off, but we shall see. So there isn't a lot to say about this other than I should have been further than I am, and I did the crochet part before I left for Perth, because I wanted to take this to Perth with me as a kind of a small project. But I wanted to do the crochet bit so that I could refer, if I messed up, I could just leave it at home. But I messed up on the first actual knitting row. I had failed to, I'd kind of worked out how many extra stitches I needed, but I'd failed to take into account how many stitches I needed to knit before I put the center markers in. So I knit one side and then put the center markers in, but I'd only knit the stitch count that it originally says in the pattern, and then carried on knitting, and I thought, oh. So I had to like mark where I'd done that, and remember I had to change that stitch when I came back to it on the way back, and I carried on. And then I realised I had too many stitches left at the end, on the end. Couldn't figure it out until I realised I'd had to put an extra stitch at the beginning to account for the crocheted cast on and having to change direction when I pick up the stitches. So I had to shift everything around again, and I was just getting myself in a right mess. So I left it until I came home. So I have done a couple more rows on it, and it is fine now. All my stitch markers in the right place. I know what I'm doing, and it's just a case of having the time to work on it now. But because the bottom bit is just garter, I can just kind of pick it up in between other projects. So if I'm knitting on a sweater and I get to, I don't know, separate for sleeves, and I think, oh, I need to just double check how many stitches I want to do. Don't want to do more at the front because of a bigger bust and things like that. I can just say, oh, I'll put that aside and look at it in the morning, and instead I can just pick up the shawl and kind of work on those garter ridges. It won't be long until I have to concentrate more to do the bees. And then once they're passed, once that section's passed, again it's just garter until I finish the shawl. And because each row is going to be getting shorter, we're starting at the bottom. Once I get past that panel, it shouldn't take very, very long at all. It's just knitting, just plain old knitting garter ridges. So I think that's all of the actual knitting. I am very thirsty now. I've been getting through a lot of coffee today. I got my fancy mug that I mentioned in my yarn haul video from Perth, which is from Emily Croft Ceramics, and yeah, it is the middle of the afternoon. I've just finished another coffee because today it has been a day. We have a holiday let, and we have guests, our final guests of the summer season. We're leaving today, but we live on an island, so to get here or to leave here, you have to travel by ferry or you have to fly. And we have two ferry companies that are actively working. We have Pentland Ferries and Northlink Ferries, and we have 3 different crossings, 2 different crossings run by Northlink. This is the overnight Aberdeen boat. But everything was cancelled today because we have strong winds, and now we had guests leaving. So I noticed this is around 5:45 this morning when I checked the updates on the ferry websites, and I thought, oh crap. So I text the guests, but there's no phone signal in the flat because it has very thick stone walls, and I didn't hear back from them until lunchtime, and they're supposed to leave by 11ish, and they like lock up and like put the key, you know, like through the door, through like into the lobby, and they didn't get the message until after they'd done this, and they were already in the town, which is a bus ride away from the flat. Even though I texted like first thing this morning, so I was like, oh dear. And I'd been stressing all morning as to, you know, what was happening, because I'd messaged them but I'd not heard back, and I'm thinking, oh, they haven't seen the message. I knew they hadn't seen the message, and if they lock up the flat and they head off and then they're locked out, and then I've got to figure out a way of being able to help them back into the flat so they can stay an extra night, which is fine. I'll just stay an extra free night. We don't have anybody in tomorrow, you know. But it was that not knowing, and we live an hour from the property, an hour's drive, and it was just really stressful. And eventually they'd had locked up, they had left, they were half an hour away, and using public transport because they had a hire car, so they'd already took the hire car back, and I was just, oh. So anyway, it's all sorted now, but it's just been one of those stressful days. Also, John has been working, we are renovating constantly, so he has been working on building a partition wall today, so I've been trying to help with that at the same time, and it has just been a day. It was a day where I just wanted to record this, edit it, so that I can get this out tomorrow, but there we go. So I think I should probably leave that here. I will be doing Vlogtober, like I said, starting at the weekend, the beginning of October, and I will vlog as much as possible, as many days as possible. I can't guarantee it'll be every single day because editing actually takes a lot longer than actually videoing, so it'll just depend on what's happening on those days. And yeah, so there's that, and there's the Halloween Sockalong, and yeah, it's going to be a busy October as usual, but at least kind of everything else is kind of at the end of the season now, so that's good. So I shall see you on the next episode, and I shall see you for the Sockalong and Vlogtober, and yeah, okay, bye bye.